Hello folks, and welcome back to my channel. This is Asif Raza, and interestingly I haven't done any recent videos, but I thought that about time that I did something. And I did some research online to see what kind of videos were available for people to view for some of the most basic use of Photoshop. Unfortunately, I didn't really find very much. For example, I was just looking for, just exploring what are the various selection tools, how they function, what they do. I did find a couple, but unfortunately they were somewhat lacking in the detail information regarding how they function and all of those things. Thus prompted me to create a video, hopefully a little more interesting and perhaps a little more detailed. Would love to hear back from you guys. Anytime you have any comments, good, bad, ugly, please feel free to post up there. I would appreciate any positive criticism if there is any. Okay, so without further ado, let's look at it. So in the toolbar, these are all the tools that are listed and available. And wherever you see a tiny arrow pointing, angling downwards, implies that there are additional tools within there. And every tool has an associated options bar at the top. And anytime you choose a particular tool, the options will change accordingly. Okay? So, for example, in this next button in the toolbar, you see a rectangular marquee, and it is referred to as the rectangular marquee. So now when I click in here, you see the rectangular marquee, elliptical marquee tool, single row, and single column. Let me explain how things function and what the options and variables are, which are very important in my opinion. So let's say, starting off with the rectangular marquee tool. Now, as soon as I pick this tool, you will notice in the options bar at the top that there's this drop down, which is supposed to have any presets that you can create for yourself for this particular tool. And then you have the beginning default, which is create a selection. This is add to selection. Okay, and if you keep your cursor there, it'll tell you subtract from selection and intersect with selection. And then you have feathering. Okay, this is very important. The default is going to be 0. And what is the difference? Okay, so let me show you. So if, let's say, I wanted to create a rectangular selection in here. So I draw a marquee, and you will see the marching ants. Now, this was done at 0 feathering. So what I'm going to do is go into the quick mask mode just to demonstrate to you how sharp the edges of this selection are. Okay, now there is a feathering option here, but unfortunately, since I've created the selection, I cannot feather it directly from here. I can modify it if I forgot to feather initially, or I wasn't sure how much feathering I really needed. So you can always go into the select menu option, and I go into select, and here my modify becomes available. So I can come in here and say feather. So pay attention to the corners on all these things. So I could, let's say, just for the sake of argument, say, hey, I want to add 50 pixels of feathering. Why? That's a separate question. So I hit OK, and you notice how it's become softer. And if I go into the quick mask mode, you will see how the edges are now sort of gently blending in. So this is what feathering does. So I'm going to undo that for a minute and revert back to my non-feathered selection. And I deselect. To deselect, you can do Control D on a Windows or Command D on a Mac. So I go back into the marquee tool, and I once again draw another rectangle. But this time I wish to draw a perfect square. So remember one thing, if you keep shift pressed, no matter where your cursor goes to, it'll always constrain the proportions and it'll go into a perfect square. And I kept shift pressed and it created the perfect square. Now, for the sake of argument, if I wanted to add to this selection, I could go into the next option in the options bar, which is add to selection. Or a shortcut is you could simply press shift, and notice as soon as you press shift there's a plus symbol associated with the cursor, the crosshair. So I could say, okay, hey, I want to add to it, because if I don't go into the add and I forget to press shift and I create a new selection, the earlier selection goes away. So we need to be aware of that. So for some of you who may be just exploring and learning Photoshop, it may not be a bad idea to simply click on the option of add to selection, and let's say I want to add to selection. So I want to add something. So you notice how the selection has been modified. I hope this is making sense. Okay? And exactly the same way, but in the opposite direction, if you wish to subtract from a selection. Okay? So you could come into the subtract selection, and let's say I wanted to subtract selection or wherever I wanted to. So I could say, hey, let's subtract this much. So notice wherever I drew the marquee, it has created that particular selection. And this is an interesting one, which is intersect with selection. So if you choose that, watch what happens. So if I draw in here, it creates just that. It didn't really do much, okay? But if I did that, it still didn't do very much. What it is doing is, it is simply intersecting whatever selection that I might have created in here. So if I did a little more of that, so it created a particular selection and it intersected and subtracted some of the redundant space which I had not bothered to cover. Now, while we are making all these selections, so I did Command D or Control D to get rid of my base selection, and this time around, let's say I'm going to leave it to 0 pixels, and if I drew a random selection. Now, oh, sorry, I'm going to revert back. My apologies. Now, exactly the same behavior is manifested with the elliptical marquee. Okay, so it's going to be a circle, and if you wish to constrain it to a perfect circle, simply press shift and it'll make the perfect circle. Okay, so for example, I'm drawing it like this, and while my cursor is there in a more of an ellipse, I simply press shift and it creates a perfect circle. So if I wish to enlarge, I need to drag it down. So we can mix and match our selections. So I could definitely add a circle with it as well. So if I simply went to the add and took another oval in here, so I've added a selection. Or for that matter, if I chose, I could go back to the rectangular marquee, ensure that you're in the add to, and let's say I wish to add to this selection. So I have now added to the selection. So I am using a combination of the rectangular and the elliptical marquee. I hope this makes some sense. Now, for the sake of argument, what if I suddenly decided that, hey, I'm going to feather my selection by 50 pixels, and I'm going to add to this, okay? So, and I want to add a freehand selection. So I want to add 50 feathers, 50 pixels of feathering as a freehand selection, and I want to draw, oops, what did I do? I did not choose add to selection, so I'm going to undo add to selection, 50 pixels of feathering, and let's say I want to add some, I mean this is random, okay? So here I have added with feathering. Let's see what it looks like. So you notice something very interesting. The earlier selections which didn't have any feathering are tack sharp along the edges. I'm in the quick mask mode, by the way. And when I chose the new freehand lasso, guess what? I had added feathering. Thus, I have added feathering in here. Not the best idea unless you know exactly why and what you're going to do with it. It's generally a good idea to create a selection and then universally have a similar feathering available in here. Okay, so this is a fundamental behavior of these tools here. Rectangular marquee, elliptical marquee, and then the lasso tool, but we haven't talked about the polygonal or the magnetic lasso. Okay, so I'm going to deselect everything, and this time around I'm going to go to a polygonal lasso. So what polygonal lasso does is it creates anchor points. Okay, so you click at one point and move on to the next position. So I click in here, move on. I click in here, move on. I click in here, move on. Click in here. And until for a selection to be worth anything, it needs to be closed every single time. Now, yes, you can bring your cursor to the point of origin where you started, and if you'll notice, there's a little circle that now appears as soon as I come back to the point of origin of starting my selection. Or, let's say, I'm done here, so what I could do is simply double click on it anywhere, and it'll go straight to the point of origin. And yet, once again, you have the same variable options: add, subtract, and intersect, and the same feathering. Okay, so this polygonal lasso will function in that way. Next up is the magnetic lasso. This is an interesting tool. What it does is it snaps to the closest neighboring color pixel that you may have chosen. For example, I want to pick on the reds. Okay, so I click once as a starter, and you notice there's a little node that it has created. And now I'm not going to click my mouse or anything, and I simply drag along. So you notice that it is creating a reasonably decent selection. And let's say, oh my goodness, I messed up. So what you can do is you simply hit delete, 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 delete until you arrive at the point where you wish to be. Okay, and then you continue on with creating your selection. And once again, you need to be, see, again, I didn't have the entire image in the picture, so I'm going to delete and then come back, and then all the way at the bottom. And just very quickly, I'm not being very clean because I just wanted to quickly demonstrate what the behavior is. So let me scroll up, and let's see. So I come in here and I come back to the point of origin, and you still have to click to close the path. Okay, so you can always refine the path in a different way, or refine the selection. Apologies, not a path, selection, in many different ways. And once again, with this particular tool, you again have exactly the same variables. Now, you could choose the width and the contrast and the frequency. What the contrast does, the width and the contrast is important because contrast looks at the local contrast between the varying pixels, and that'll determine how refined or unrefined your selection may be. The width here is the range of pixels that it is trying to detect within that particular region. Okay, so again, Control D or Command D to deselect. If you wish to deselect using the menus, you can go into select, and you have a option of deselecting. And remember one thing, all the shortcuts that we continuously use, which make Photoshop a little more efficient in using, most of these shortcuts are available to you in the menus. So try and remember all of this. Well, over a period of time you will. Next up, what I did not mention is the single marquee, row, or column. So if I've picked on a row, I simply click and let go. And what it has done is it's literally selected one single pixel. Be able to see the behavior. Here is the marquee, and if I enlarge this, you will notice that it is literally a single pixel selection. You notice that? A single row. In exactly the same way, I deselect it, and if I were to go into the single column, it'll once again pick on a single column. Can you extend it? Not really. It just literally is designed to do that. But again, you have the same options of adding, subtracting, or intersecting. Okay? So keep that in. I mean, the options bar is ridiculously important. So please, 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 I don't know how to stress on it, but this is ridiculously important to understand the variables with the options bar. Okay? So we have covered which ones? Rectangular marquee, elliptical marquee, single row, single column, and then we came to the freehand lasso, the basic lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool and the magnetic lasso tool. Now, interestingly, in the most recent iteration of Photoshop, which is the 2020, they have also introduced a new tool, which is the object selection tool. Now, we always had additional tools called the magic wand tool and the quick selection tool, which are also relatively new to Photoshop, not the magic wand tool. Magic wand tool has been there forever and ever and ever. So this again, so I'll begin with the quick selection tool. When you take the quick selection tool, once again you notice there's the basic tool, there's the add tool, there's the subtract tool, there's a brush size, there's an angle to the brush size, and here, whether you want to sample colors from the composite or a single layer, or in here, just keep automatically enhance the selection edges. It's a choice that you make, okay? Now, at the same time, there's select subject and select and mask. So I want to first demonstrate the behavior of the brush. So just for the sake of argument, I wish to enlarge the brush size. And let's say I'm going to leave the hardness to about 50%, around there. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact, but so be it. I'll leave the spacing to it. And I'll increase my brush size even more. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to choose an appropriate brush size to be able to select the backdrop, okay? Because just for the heck of it, I wish to strip the individual away from the background and place her somewhere else. So I can simply click and let go, and notice it picks up an X amount of space. I'm going to deselect, Control or Command D, and then click, and then just continue dragging along. So it's done actually a very reasonable selection. And now notice it's by default come to the add selection. So I come in here and I draw. So here it hasn't really done much of a job. Okay, so again, options and variables depending on what you're doing. So what if I chose a smaller brush, relatively speaking? I increase the hardness a little bit. So now I have a smaller brush. And let's see how it behaves. So I click, very similar to it, and making sure you're in the add to selection up to there. And you can always work in piecemeal, so you don't have to go all the way across in one go. So again, very similar behavior. Okay, so I'm just pointing out how you refine it is a separate matter. We'll cover that in a separate video. I'm just explaining the basic behavior of the tools here. So I'm going to deselect, and this time around I am going to choose the magic wand tool. Now the magic wand tool has similar options over here as we had in our marquee selections or the lasso selections, okay? So what the magic wand tool, and then it has its additional, what it does is, depending on what option you take here, point sample, 3x3, 5x5, 11x11, and so forth, and the tolerance, it'll create a selection based on that. So what it does is it looks for localized color or contrast. So if I left it to point sample, it's literally looking at a single pixel selection. Okay, so again, to demonstrate that, let's go to a pixel view for a minute. And I am in the point sample, tolerance set to 0, and I just decide to pick on that. So it's picked on very similar neighboring tones. Okay, now deselect, and as opposed to a point sample, I'm going to do a 3x3 and click in this color yet once again. Notice how the selection is larger. Okay, so now it's looking at a 5x5 average of 3x3. So point sample was, it said, hey, this is the one, and I'm going to pick on the 3 square pixel neighborhood as efficiently as I can. Okay, so that's all that it did. In the 3x3, it looked at a 3x3 average and obviously extended its choice. By the same token, in the 5x5, so I'm going to click in here, and now it's a much larger selection. So I have to reduce it. Notice it's spreading across the board quite a bit. Okay, so that's what it is doing. Now, by the same token, let's say if I reduce the image to fill my screen and I said, hey, I want to select the backdrop, the same way as I was trying to demonstrate earlier, I click, and this is a 5 by 5 average with a 0 tolerance. Okay, because I know I don't want to pick on a 1 point sample or a 3 by 3. But what if I increase my tolerance, let's say to 20 pixels or 20%? Aha, much better. Now, I could definitely go into the add to selection and continue clicking away, right? And I can keep on adding by clicking in areas that had been missed out, and so on and so forth. So you notice how I'm simply adding on to the selection. Now, I could, technically speaking, say, hey, let's go 11 by 11 average, and then add to selection, and may become more efficient. Okay, so, or I take an 11 by 11 average, and my tolerance goes to 30, and then see what happens. So the selection has increased quite dramatically in its extent to what it is looking at, and it makes my workflow a little more efficient. So this is the behavior of the Magic Wand tool. So remember, with the Magic Wand, it is imperative that you understand, and each image will behave differently based on the resolution and so on and so forth, what sample size and what tolerance you may wish to use. Now that we have familiarized ourselves a little bit with the freehand lasso tool, the polygonal lasso, the magnetic lasso, the marquees, the rectangular, elliptical, single row and single column, and then the Magic Wand tool and the quick selection tool. Now, before we get into the object selection tool, let's say, something that I had not mentioned earlier, I thought I should wait on it. So if I were to take the Magic Wand tool, I still have the option of choosing a sample size and the tolerance, and then simply say select subject. Okay, now I could say select and mask, but right now I'm simply showing you the behavior of the tool and how and what it does. So if I were to click on select subject, you will notice that it has created a very decent selection, far better than what it was doing earlier on. Now, what I could do is another thing. So right now what it has done is, since I told it to select the subject, there are other areas, the little bit of the water showing through here in the hair and over here and all those things. Obviously I'll have to refine it. But what if I did something else? What if I were to go into select and inverse the selection? So now it's actually the background which has become the selection. And I go into the menu at the top and I say similar. So what it does is, notice it has picked up on all those matching colors that existed in here. And if just to view it in a quick mask mode, if I showed you, it becomes a fairly nice starting point for creating a wonderful selection. So it's a quick and easy way of doing this. Okay, you could do exactly the same thing using the quick selection tool as well, where you simply go into and say, hey, let's select subject, and let's see what happens. So as soon as I say select subject, the system goes in and it does a pretty similar selection. And if I were to now invert the selection, and all I did was Command Shift I, on a PC you could do Control Shift I, and then say similar. Exactly the same behavior. In either case, it gives me a wonderful starting point to create my selection. So now I'm reducing the image size a little bit and introduce you to the object selection tool. I mean, this can work in many different ways. So with the object selection tool, now you notice up in the options bar, it also has the primary basic starting selection, add to, subtract to, intersect, and then whether you wish to use a rectangle or a freehand lasso. So you could determine the area that you define. Okay, and once again, multi-layers and all of the above. Or you could simply click on select subject yet once again, and the behavior will be no different than the other two, the quick selection and the Magic Wand. Okay, so notice I simply clicked on select subject. Okay, but as opposed to that, just to explain, if I were to take the rectangle tool here in the object selection tool, and I carefully drew a rectangle around my subject. Let's see what happens if I do that. Because if you have more than one subject matter in the image, you may wish to do it this way using that tool. So the idea is to understand when to use what tool to its best possible behavior. So this is how that selection tool works. Now, if let's say we don't bother with any of the selections tools, notice at the top in the Photoshop menu you have something called select. Okay, now right here you also have, hey, let's select just the focus area, let's select the subject. Okay, color range is very important. It's a technique of making selections, but we're going to talk about that in a completely separate video for a moment. Let's look at subject, and it'll be no different than any of these selection tools where it said select subject. Again, a very similar selection. Okay, and if you went back in there and we said focus area, let's see what happens. So now, so it's telling me, hey guys, you want to determine what kind of focus area you want to look at and what do you want to do, selection, and it'll trim it and output it to a new layer or whatever it may be. Okay, so let's say I increase the focus range and then see what happens. So notice it's working because it's a bit of a resource hungry system. So it's become too much. Okay, so I could gently reduce it. So it's a matter of finding the right balance, and eventually you will get it right. It depends on what you're doing. That'll determine which tool you use. Keep that in mind. I would like to believe that it's a fairly detailed look into the selection tool.